The role that the patriarchy plays in the Dance of the Dragons is one of the biggest focal points of House of the Dragon, and Alicent Hightower is often portrayed as the lone female perspective on the side of Westeros' patriarchal structure, while Rhaenyra and the other women in her collective are seen as symbols of female empowerment in a world that is hell-bent on subjugating them. But one recent turn of events has inspired an interesting reaction to Alicent, which misinterprets her entire character arc thus far. A fairly common reading of Alicent's current exclusion from the political sphere of the Greens seems to be that this is the natural consequence of her actions and choices. Because she pushed Aegon forward as king and made a decision that somehow endorses the patriarchy, it's ironically fitting that she is now being pushed out of an arena that the misogynists of Westeros don't believe that she ever belonged in anyway. Essentially, her loss of power is simply comeuppance for picking the wrong side and supporting misogyny rather than choosing feminism. It obviously brings to mind the classic, "I never thought leopards would eat my face," sobs woman who voted for the leopards eating people's faces party. But this is a thought-provoking take given Alicent's actual journey as a character, and it oversimplifies the situation while ignoring the reality of most women who don't have any hard power like dragons. In fact, it also seems to ignore the reality that most women who even do have hard power like dragons have to face. Clearly, Alicent isn't a fan-favorite character among viewers, and given how the show presents her on the surface, that's somewhat understandable. Again, House of the Dragon leans hard into the greens and the blacks representing misogyny versus feminism. And given that Alicent is the only woman with any real involvement in the politics of the Greens, it seems clear that the audience isn't really supposed to like her. But one of the many problems with this simplistic view of female empowerment within the patriarchy is that almost every woman in this fictional world cannot simply decide to take power for herself. And Alicent is, and always has been, a living example of that reality. The notion that Alicent is somehow getting what's coming to her because she made bad choices is a bizarre one, because frankly, this is how her life has always been. It's not as if she was truly powerful in her own right when her father pushed her onto the Widower King, or when the king decided to marry her as a teenager, or when she ruled in his stead while he was slowly dying, or when Aegon was crowned king. Yes, Alicent's control over her own situation and the political landscape of Westeros has waxed and waned over the course of her life. But that has always ultimately been as a result of the men around her. Her father used her as a political tool and included her in his machinations when it served him. But he also made a lot of power moves that she was not only not involved in, but that she wasn't even aware of. Viserys allowed Alicent to make decisions about issues that he didn't care about or had no personal investment in, but he didn't show any care or consideration for her wants or needs if those conflicted with his own. Aegon was arguably the most deferential person to Alicent, but he still made massive decisions that went against her best interests or desires without asking for her advice or even informing her. And ultimately, when Aemond was given power, he immediately disregarded his mother's input and shut her out of the political sector, and essentially instructed her to get back to more womanly pursuits. So yes, Aemond's final declaration was the most outwardly misogynistic pushback that Alicent has experienced thus far, but it is not at all different from her past experiences. Her positions of power were always entirely reliant on the powerful men around her, and in every instance, those men have proven that Alicent has no real control or influence beyond what they bestow upon her. Ergo, the notion that she is reaping what she has sown by choosing the patriarchy is ridiculous. And it's not just ridiculous because of this. Alicent is obviously contrasted with most of the major female players in the Dance of the Dragons because she doesn't have a dragon. Rhaena is the only character who is even comparable to Alicent in that sense. And it seems pretty pertinent to note that Rhaena has similarly been pushed out of relevance within the Black faction, because she is seen as functionally borderline useless. So again, the theory that Alicent's exclusion is somehow driven solely by patriarchal ideals, or that she would be more powerful if she had chosen team feminism, doesn't really hold up to much scrutiny. And what makes Aemond's betrayal of his mother feel so exceptionally cruel is where he learned this behavior from. Because nothing exemplifies Alicent's relative powerlessness in her own life more than Viserys' complete inaction regarding Aemond's lost eye, despite the fact that Alicent essentially never fought harder for anyone than she did for Aemond when he was being treated unjustly. Aemond's total and blatant disregard for Alicent is heartbreaking, because he only knows how little control she has in any serious matters because she tried and failed to exact repercussions on Luke and Rhaenyra when Aemond was wounded. And it's hard to believe that this incident had no impact on his current complete disregard for his mother. He doesn't necessarily blame her for his lack of justice, as his proclamation that he was going to give Alicent Luke's eye as a gift seems to indicate that he understands how devastating that incident was for her. However, the fact that he dismisses her so caustically as soon as he has the power that his father once had is clearly meaningful. But the other side of this conflict over Aemond's eye is actually one of the most interesting angles on the incorrect assumption that Alicent is now reaping the punishment that she earned for herself by maintaining the patriarchy instead of supporting Rhaenyra and choosing feminism. House of the Dragon has repeatedly hammered at the idea that Alicent made the wrong choice in a multitude of ways. She misunderstood Viserys' last words. She supported Aegon even though he's not suited to ruling. And now she has been shut out of the political plans in her own family because of Aemond. And yes, all of these things are unfair and could possibly indicate that Alicent made bad decisions when advocating for her own children. However, we have concrete, demonstrable evidence that taking Rhaenyra's side wouldn't necessarily have been any better. Because yes, Rhaenyra and Alicent had a childhood friendship. And yes, they still appear to genuinely care for each other in some way. Plus, to her credit, Rhaenyra does have quite a few women in her inner circle who are influential and have significant standing within her faction. The problem is, though, the idea that this would mean that Alicent would be in a position of power if she had chosen the right side is fundamentally flawed. Firstly, we see how Rhaenyra herself struggles to get men to see her as their equal, let alone their superior, despite the fact that she is supposed to be their queen and is a literal dragon rider. She thought she had to slap Lord Celtigar into submission because her male supporters don't actually defer to her in the way that they do to men that outrank them. So the notion that Alicent would somehow be in a better position if she had supported Rhaenyra obviously doesn't make any sense. But going back to the maiming of Aemond, the way in which Alicent is treated by Rhaenyra during this conflict shows, in real time, why choosing Rhaenyra's side or supposedly choosing feminism wouldn't have made Alicent more empowered in any concrete way. Some of the women in Rhaenyra's retinue are dragon riders, so they do have some objective power on their own. But the political power that they hold within the Blacks isn't something that actually belongs to them. It's something that is bestowed on them by Rhaenyra herself. As we see with Rhaena, being on Rhaenyra's squad doesn't magically imbue women with self-determination. They are still beholden to Rhaenyra's wants, and their situations are really only differentiated by the fact that a woman is giving them orders rather than a man. And as far as Alicent goes, choosing Rhaenyra wouldn't have improved her status in any objective or immutable sense, which is something that Rhaenyra clearly demonstrated when Luke attacked Aemond. Ironically, despite the fact that House of the Dragon has embraced a girl power narrative with Rhaenyra, all of the power that Rhaenyra has gained and is fighting for is something that she only even has access to because her father decided it. Her claim to the throne stems from her father's command, and her protection during his life was purely based on his favoritism and personal whims. Alicent was very harshly reminded of how little power she held in comparison to Viserys when Aemond was injured. But she was also harshly reminded of how much power Rhaenyra could hold over her if she wanted to. And she saw how Rhaenyra would use that power to completely disempower Alicent. When using her father's favoritism to her advantage suited her, to protect her own interests and protect Luke, Rhaenyra didn't hesitate to use that to the greatest degree possible. She didn't just decimate Alicent's authority as queen. She didn't even offer Alicent the opportunity of some kind of restorative action or justice. She didn't just exercise power over Alicent. She exercised complete power over her. And this is why the idea that Alicent is now powerless because she chose the wrong side or didn't support women just doesn't hold up. Based on past experience alone, choosing Rhaenyra's side not only would have gone against her own interests, it would have put her under the control of someone who has already totally disregarded her for the sake of her own interests. Rhaenyra taking the Iron Throne as a regent queen in her own right would have been a step forward for women in Westeros. But her ascension wouldn't alter the power structure of Westeros, and her leadership wouldn't magically imbue all women with more power than they once had. It would simply put a woman at the top of that power structure. And putting Rhaenyra in that position of power over Alicent would have disempowered Alicent as much as any man would have. Likely even more so. So, Alicent being excluded from the political sphere now that Aemond is regent isn't a natural consequence of her own choices. It's a natural consequence of the societal structure that she lives in. And that consequence almost certainly wouldn't be any different if she had chosen to support Rhaenyra as queen. But what do you think? Did Alicent get what she asked for? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.